Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout, where today we're going to be taking a look at small guns and going over how strong they've been throughout the Fallout history. Now, small guns have probably been the most consistent damage type out of any of the weapons in the game, because generally you get them very early on. They usually scale pretty well throughout the games, and usually they have the most variety out of the weapons. At least that's how it was in the older games. Starting out Fallout 1, they were probably going to be your best option if you wanted a ranged weapon. The only other options that you really had in the early game of Fallout 1 were like melee and unarmed. There wasn't any big guns until like 2/3 the way through the game when the super mutants show up, to where you can actually pick those up, and there was only 3. And energy weapons weren't available in the early game either. They were generally more of a late game weapon as well, even though you could get like laser and plasma pistols towards the mid game. Usually you wouldn't even bother with that if you were going with like small guns and energy weapons, because small guns would just scale better up to that point, and then you could swap over to energy weapons. In Fallout 1 you would also start out with the 10mm pistol, which was a pretty good weapon to start out with. It did okay damage, it did decent damage per second, and had good range. It took a very common round. 10mm was one of the most common rounds that you could find, and then you could also get a 10mm SMG within the first vault that you go to. You did need ropes to actually get down there to get it, but that was basically just an upgrade to where it did the same exact damage as the 10mm pistol, had the same range, but you could swap it between either semi-auto or burst fire, and you could have more damage thanks to that. There was also some other early game weapons that worked really well for small guns, including the double barrel shotgun and the hunting rifle. You could get these within like the first couple places you go as well, and they were very solid. The hunting rifle did good damage and had long range, and the double barrel shotgun had pretty devastating damage at very close range. Usually you kind of wanted either the shotgun or the submachine gun for fighting at close range, and then like the hunting rifle for fighting at long range. Once you got about midway through Fallout 1, you would usually hit like the hub, and then you could pick up some other weapons there. You could pick up the sniper rifle, which was really good. It just did more damage and had even longer range than the hunting rifle. It used the same bullet as well. You could also pick up the 223 revolver, the Blade Runner gun, which was really good too. That was arguably one of the best guns in the game. And there was also the combat shotgun. So it kind of made small guns like pretty consistent in the early game and very strong in the mid game. Towards the end game, though, small guns wouldn't really get any better than that. Like, the best small guns were like the combat shotgun, the 223 pistol, and the sniper rifle. And you could use all of those all the way through the game without any trouble, but they weren't going to be as good as swapping over to like energy weapons, where like the laser rifle and the plasma rifle were just straight up stronger than those weapons. Moving into Fallout 2, small guns would kind of fill the same role they did in Fallout 1, where they were pretty much your only early game ranged option. You couldn't actually get any small guns at the very start of Fallout 2. You were just restricted to melee, unarmed, and throwing, and that was really it. But as soon as you get to the first town, you could grab your first gun, which was the pipe rifle. This one took the 10mm round. It was a single shot. It wasn't very strong. It didn't have very long range, but it was the first ranged option that you actually had. So if you're going to small guns, that was going to be like your go-to, at least right then. Within that same town, though, you could pick up things like the 10mm pistol, and you might as well just use that, since that one had, I think, a little bit longer range than the pipe rifle, held more shots in it, which was the most important part, and did about the same damage. So, like, that would naturally be your upgrade path. After that, there was quite a few other options that you could get. The 44 Magnum, the revolver, was actually a really good option in Fallout 2 early on, since it did pretty high damage, and you could upgrade it later with the speed loader, which for some odd reason gave it extra range too. I'm not sure why. The 44 Magnum actually had very short range in Fallout 2. And then you could also pick up things like the hunting rifle, the double barrel shotgun. You could pick up multiple different combat shotguns in Fallout 2, which was pretty strong. There was submachine guns in this that were pretty decent, including like the Tommy gun, the P90, and the G11, weirdly enough. You could pick up an assault rifle that was pretty guaranteed throughout the game, so that would help during like the mid game. There was still like the sniper rifle that was pretty solid too. And towards the end game, we actually had a whole lot more small guns that were pretty good. Like you could get the FAL, and there was even a couple mods for it. And the Gauss rifle or the FAL modded was probably going to be like your end game small gun. Potentially also the Pancor jackhammer, which you could get, a different shotgun. And all of those were pretty decent. They could take on just about everything in the game, particularly the Gauss rifle. If you're using the Gauss rifle, especially with aim shots, it could be really devastating, where this one did pretty high damage. Small guns were still not like the strongest weapon in Fallout 2. They were good in the early game and really good in the mid game, just like they had been in Fallout 1. But towards the end game, there was just better options. Like the pulse rifle is better than the Gauss rifle in most situations. It does almost double the damage. It does electricity, which almost nothing resists, and I believe it also like ignored a certain amount of armor too for some odd reason. It did like so much more, and most of the time you don't need the extra range from the Gauss rifle. Big guns had also gotten way better in Fallout 2 as well. Like the Bowser was pretty devastating. Things like the miniguns were also very devastating, so you had some other options, but you wouldn't ever be really sad if you just built just small guns. You would still have good options for that, so long as you didn't run out of ammo with your Gauss rifle, which was pretty unlikely because even at the end, like the Enclave tends to have Gauss rifles, so you can pick up ammo from them too. Into Fallout Tactics, small guns would appear once again, and small guns were really good in Fallout Tactics because they were pretty much your first ranged option once again. There was no big guns until about a third the way through the game, with some exceptions. You could pick up like a rocket launcher, and if you went to a specific trader, you could pick up one of the miniguns. There was also a way to get like a couple other miniguns either from random encounters or if you were willing to steal them from the Brotherhood. Then there was options there, but those were about the only like big guns. Energy weapons like weren't in the first half of the game in Tactics, so like small guns weren't really competing with them until towards the end game, which is probably pretty good. There's a ton of small guns in Tactics, probably like the most variety of different weapons that we've gotten in any of the games besides maybe New Vegas. We'll talk about New Vegas once we get there though, because small guns did change. Where you had like pistols, submachine guns, shotguns, rifles, you had a lot of really good options in Tactics. Some of these were definitely better than others. Like most of the pistols you can kind of ignore with the exception of like the Gauss pistol being pretty good, although the Gauss rifle uses the same ammo and that one's better. The submachine guns were really good. You started out with an MP5 in Tactics, which was very solid. It used a super common round with the 9mm, and it had really good stats across the board. Rifles definitely stood out a lot in Tactics, and that's usually what you wanted your characters to be having if they were going to specialize in small guns, where you could get like the hunting rifle, which was just the best early game weapon. It had the longest effective range and it got bonus accuracy at longer range, as well as it had pretty decent damage and used a super common round. AKs were pretty strong early on since they gave you a burst fire option and used the same bullet as the hunting rifle. You could also get the M16 fairly early on, which was potentially better than both those guns, the AK and the hunting rifle, since it did have long range like the hunting rifle and it still had burst fire like the AK, so it kind of was a good middle ground. The FAL was really strong, and there was a way to actually get two of these pretty early on if you wanted to. One of them was sold by a vendor, and one of them you could pick up the Vault Boy, which you could actually recruit to your team if you wanted, and he had an FAL, and that was really, really strong. There was also like an M1 Garand that was pretty strong, and you could get the sniper rifles about midway through the game, which was a really good option to swap out your hunting rifle for, since it just did more damage, had longer range, and was better at taking like aim shots. Shotguns were also extremely strong in this game, where you had like the double barrel shotgun or the pump action shotgun that was really good early on. You could get combat shotguns, and there was the Pancore jackhammer here once again. I think there was only one of it, but that was actually a really solid weapon since shotguns could take multiple different shotgun shells. So if you wanted to load these up with like electric shells towards the end of the game, that was still really good against the robots. Small guns definitely shined in the early game of Tactics. Mid-game, they were still decent, but certain ones definitely fell off here because then you were going to be fighting super mutants. They were a lot tankier, had a lot more health, to where you needed things that did a lot of burst damage. So things like the FAL were still really good, or things like the combat shotguns were still really good, but other weapons like the hunting rifle definitely fell off here, to where they just weren't nearly as good against them, because pretty much all the super mutants used big guns, and those ones could definitely destroy you at close range. They were very, very scary. Towards the end game, small guns tend to fall off a little bit, mostly because there's just not a whole lot of small guns that work really well towards the robots. The robots are even tankier, have even more HP, and have even more armor than like the super mutants. And like the sniper rifle can still hurt them. And like the combat shotguns, if loaded with the electrical slugs, still do a lot of damage to them. So those are still decent. FAL can still kind of work against them. The standout towards the end game for small guns though is definitely going to be the Gauss rifle, where they have buffed this thing up a ton from Fallout 2, where in Fallout 2 it was like 30 to 40 damage roughly, and now it's like 60 to 80 damage, still having the same range, and it's absolutely devastating. Like, that was like the end game weapon that you really wanted to have. In Fallout 3, once again, small guns would be the go-to ranged option, where you had a ton of variety with this, especially compared to some of the other weapons. You had, again, pistols, rifles, shotguns, submachine guns, things like that. For pistols, you had a couple decent ones, especially early on with like the 10mm pistol. You could swap that out for the 10mm submachine gun, or swap it out for some other 10mm guns. You had the dart gun, which was really strong. That one honestly doesn't matter what kind of weapon it is though, because you're just just using it for the effect of crippling legs. The 44 Magnums were definitely standouts, especially like Polson's revolver, where that one counted as a shotgun, and Fallout 3 is also when shotguns were really overpowered because of the way that they counted towards crits. For rifles, you had things like assault rifles early on. You had the Chinese assault rifle, which was pretty decent, especially with the Zulong assault rifle, which you could get once you got to the Museum of Technology. You could get Old Painless, the hunting rifle. I like to actually rush that pretty early on in my Fallout 3 playthroughs because it uses a super common round. There was the lever action rifles. Some of them came in 10mm. Then you also had Lincoln's Repeater that came in the 44 Magnum, so you had options there. The sniper rifle was pretty good. And then probably the biggest selling point of small guns in Fallout 3 was definitely the combat shotgun, which you could upgrade into like the terrible shotgun. Kind of an odd choice for a shotgun, just in terms of looks, but was extremely devastating in Fallout 3. Again, this was mostly because of how crits worked in Fallout 3, where you could crit with every single pellet, and every single pellet did full crit damage. The only weapon I would say was better than like the combat shotgun overall in Fallout 3 would probably be the Metal Blaster, but that one's also a shotgun weapon. It's just a longer range, higher capacity shotgun and faster shooting, so like that one just kind of wins because of that. But other than that, the combat shotgun is pretty much like tippy top tier in Fallout 3. Into Fallout New Vegas, small guns would be done away with. There was no longer small guns in New Vegas, there was just guns. So everything that was already a small gun was going to be sitting here, and everything that was generally a big gun that would be firing out standard bullets would also be here. And once again, guns were very solid in Fallout New Vegas. This would be the biggest selection of guns that we ever had in any of the Fallout games, besides maybe Tactics, and you had guns that covered basically everything. Now you had things like light machine guns, combat rifles, combat shotguns, you had pistols, submachine guns, revolvers. You had a ton of options now in New Vegas, and generally they were very, very powerful. Just like pretty much every combat style in New Vegas, there was something that was overpowered in this, where you had like pistols like the 44 Magnum or the Ranger Sequoia if you wanted a huge iron to knock down enemies. You had things like Maria with the 9mm pistol, you had a Light Shining in Darkness, also with a 45 if you wanted to knock things down quickly. You had a bunch of rifles you could pick from, whether that be like the M1 Garand showing up once again in this machine, or I guess the battle rifle. You also had like the BAR with the automatic rifle showing back up again too, which was really cool. You had the gigantic 50 caliber that could knock down enemies. You had things like the assault carbine. You had a ton of lever action rifles that could kill things. With submachine guns, you had a lot of really good ones like the Tommy gun or the Grease gun. You had like Sleepy Time with the 10mm submachine gun that was pretty good. With shotguns, you had some really overpowered stuff, especially with a riot shotgun. If you had End State Back, that was pretty much insane. Guns were extremely strong in Fallout New Vegas, and there was a ton of different perks that you could take for like making these even stronger. So you could go with like Cowboy if you wanted more lever action and revolver damage. You could go with Grunt if you wanted more like marksman rifle damage, or like the 1911 damage. Like there was options there for it. You could go with and stay back if you wanted more shotgun consistency and just wanted to bully absolutely everything. That perk is insane. You could go with perks like handloader, because now you could make custom ammunition for basically every weapon in the game. So didn't matter if you wanted to be using shotguns, sniper rifles, submachine guns. You can make your own custom bullets for each of these to do even more damage, and vendors actually sold custom ammo too, so you had plenty of options here if you wanted to take any of these. And then we have Fallout 4's guns, which Fallout 4's guns were also really good in the early game and would scale, so pretty much the same as they did in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. This was a ton of variety that you could pick from. You started out with the 10mm pistol pretty much in Fallout 4. You didn't quite start out with it, but you could pick this up right at the very start, and it was a pretty consistent weapon. You could turn this into like a submachine gun, because Fallout 4 now had weapon customizations. The submachine gun version of the 10mm pistol was actually very solid. There was also some unique versions of it, like the Deliverer, which is based off of Walther PPK and one of my favorite looking guns in Fallout 4. You still had like the big 44 Magnum or the Western Revolver, which was even stronger than the 44. For rifles, you had a lot of really good options here, where you had like the combat rifle, which was very consistent, especially if you got the Overseer's Guardian, where that one was just one of the best guns in the game and you could just buy it. And it wasn't even that expensive too. You had like the hunting rifle, which was pretty solid in the early game, and you could make it potentially better with legendary effects. There was like the handmade rifle that you could get from the Nuka World DLC, the AK, which was absolutely insane if you got either of the unique ones, like the Problem Solver or the Splatter Cannon. Did so much damage, mostly because they had the Furious ability on them. You had like the lever action rifles too in Far Harbor, which was cool. Other than the animation, not syncing up with the gun. I really don't like that. And then you had like explosive weapons that just completely could level anything, like the kiloton rifle or the spray and pray. You had really good options there. Even in the early game, you had all the pipe weapons that you could pick from, which were pretty common, and you could get a whole bunch of bullets for them. They're definitely not my favorite weapons in Fallout 4. I would swap them out for some of the others, but they were available to you. There was a lot of options in this. Certain other weapons could kind of count as guns too, towards perks, because perks were more separated now in Fallout 4, where you could kind of go with rifles, or full auto weapons, or pistols, or like heavy guns, but sometimes they would interact with other perks. For example, like the spray and pray would be a full auto weapon, but it would also get benefits from Demo Expert because it does explosive damage. So you have like 2 perks working in combination, and that could be the same with quite a few different weapons. Overall, how good have small guns been throughout the Fallout universe? Generally pretty consistent. Like, they've always been decent at the very least. There has been standouts where they've been bad at times, especially with particular weapons where it's like, okay, the BB gun hasn't really been all that good, unless you get like a unique version of it where then it's really strong. Or some of the starting weapons haven't really been that good, they don't really scale that well, but they're meant to be like early game weapons. Sometimes that works, sometimes not so much, where you have like the Chinese pistol in Fallout 3 where it's like, okay, why would I ever use this when I have the 10mm pistol at the very start that holds more bullets and does more damage? Like, unless it's just for looks, which admittedly the Mauser is really cool. But that's been like the only time where like small guns have generally been bad. They've always been a good option if you want to build into them. Maybe not always the best option, but always a solid option. So tell me your thoughts on small guns and just the guns in general throughout the Fallout games. If I was to pick when they would be the strongest, probably consistently the strongest would be New Vegas because there's just so many good ones. But otherwise it would be like 3 or 4 because of like the individual overpowered things, but that's more like Fallout 4 having crazy effects and Fallout 3 having crazy shotguns. Although you could argue that like New Vegas with like Riot Shotgun and Stay Back is also. Tell me your thoughts on these. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so very much for watching it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye everybody!